Summoned by a goddess, he is discarded for having the weakest power. If you dig my recaps, don't forget to subscribe and smash that notification bell. In a dark apartment in Japan, a boy is beaten by his own father who finds any excuse to hit the kid. This time he was furious because his son was taking too long to eat, and in his mind that was reason enough to hit him. Not fully understanding why he was being beaten, the child kept repeating an apology. Years later, these abuses still haunted Tauka Momori. On a school trip, he overhears Sagu Ayaka, the Class 2C representative, demanding the return of a book that Omiyata had taken just to annoy her. During this, Momori notices some classmates like Yasu observing with anger but keeping their heads down, while the Takao sisters act calmly, just like the apathetic teacher in charge of the trip, Zakurogi Tomatsu. Suddenly, Momori decides to stand up to the bully but freezes when the guy puffs out his chest. That's when Takuto steps in, and being a respected student makes Omiyata return the girl's book. Even so, Omiyata continues to bully the students, with Yasu being the next victim. The teacher then intervenes in a bizarre way, saying it would be a huge loss if Yasu took his own life, and even suggests the boy should do it when he's not the teacher if he chooses that path. Suddenly, without any noticeable reason, the students on the bus are transported to a world called Alien by the goddess Vicious. Without offering explanations, the entity reveals that the summoned humans are the hope to defeat the great demon empire. 200 years ago, the heroes of that time defeated this great evil, but the dark forces have returned once more. Because of this, Vicious needs the powers of the chosen ones again. The students around are confused, with some thinking it was a dream, others trying to process what the entity told them, and some believing they had died. Strangely, the teacher takes responsibility, confessing he doesn't know what's happening, but asks everyone to listen to what the goddess has to say. Apparently, he was eyeing the divine virtues of the mysterious woman's body. Meanwhile, Momori analyzes the spacious stone-built room with fire baskets and soldiers wielding swords and spears. Lastly, a goddess with golden eyes. Thinking about this, he pinches his own cheek, doubting he was really taken to an alternate world. Among everyone, Takuto seems the most composed and coldly asks if they were summoned to fight this so-called demon empire. When the goddess confirms he wants to know what happens if they refuse, Vicious calmly responds that they will be prevented from returning to their world. Takuto questions how they could return, and she explains that the reverse summoning ritual requires a special element called the Demon King's essence, and there are two ways to obtain this essence. One is to obtain the heart of the Demon King, the very source of the Demon King's essence, and the other is to collect the essence that will come after defeating this great enemy and place it in the crystal necklace Vicious carries. In his usual manner, Omiyata confronts the goddess, saying they have nothing to do with this empire, so Vicious kneels before the summoned ones and begs for their help, calling the students the heroes of salvation. Sagu argues that they are just ordinary humans and perhaps not the help the goddess expects, but the entity reveals that all of them have powers they never imagined, causing a tremendous commotion among everyone. Out of nowhere, a giant wolf is brought in along with a human. The wolf is then released and devours the man, instantly spreading blood all over the hall. Using a fireball, Vicious exterminates the beast. Faced with the facts, Hijiri Takao realizes they have no choice but to accept what's on the table. Then the entity announces it's time to confront the hidden abilities within each of them, and each student steps up to a magic sphere that determines the summoned one's skill level. As everyone took their turns, the sphere showed average energy until it was Omiyata's turn, who displayed above normal strength. However, Takuto follows and breaks the evaluation crystal, making Vicious applaud and say he is part of the S class. Omiyata, envious, asks what class he belongs to, and the goddess informs him he is ranked A. As always, the boy realizes he will never be on Takuto's level. Next, Ayaka takes the test and also breaks another crystal. Besides her, Hijiri also joins the S class, something that had never happened before in this world, with so many summoned ones showing such high abilities. Finally, it's Momori Tauka's turn, who expresses a purple light in the sphere, perhaps the weakest of all. Without giving any details, the goddess sends the next person for testing, leaving Momori confused. He asks which class he belongs to, but is ignored, so he steps away, certain that he is just a background character in this whole process, just like in the world he came from. While these thoughts hammer in his mind, Memori hears from the goddess that one of the summoned has reached the strength of the dark hero, the most powerful of all. With his hand on the crystal, Yasu knew his time had come. Next, the summoned ones learn to see their statuses, and Memori is frustrated with the low numbers he displays, discovering he belongs to the E class. Each of the summoned possessed an exclusive ability, and he was capable of inflicting status conditions. Omiata, fed up with all the talking, tells the goddess to take a break. The teacher asks the student to speak respectfully to the entity, so the boy starts to show off by throwing in everyone's face that he is a class, unlike the teacher who is only D class. Next, Vicious announces a ritual and calls Memori to participate, stating that he is the lowest ranked among all the summoned. She explains that in the past, the weakest always posed a hindrance to the higher class heroes, and thus it was decided that the best course of action would be to discard these individuals. However, since public disposal might cause an uprising among the others, she decides to give the lowest ranked hero a chance. Memori will be left in a ruin, and if he survives, he will no longer be discarded. In this ruin, highly dangerous criminals will be lurking along with other heroes who were also cast aside. This terrible place is known as the Ruin of Discard. Desperate, Memori argues that he possesses a unique ability and therefore shouldn't be considered so weak, but the goddess dismisses this completely. According to her, abilities that inflict conditions are worthless in this world because they generally only work against extremely weak enemies and last very briefly. In other words, Vicious disdainfully says that this is the ability of a loser. Outraged, Memori remembers that it was she who brought him there only to be discarded, but Takudo himself steps in to end the discussion. Tired of the weakling Memori has shown himself to be. Humiliated by everyone, the weakest of the group feels a hand on his shoulder and realizes it's Yasu, someone he had helped a lot when he was bullied. However, like the others, Yasu joins the chorus and belittles him, putting him down for being of inferior rank. Then the process of teleporting the discarded hero begins, and as is tradition in Alien, each summoned individual receives a unique item. In Memori's case, he is given a worn-out leather bag capable only of making a gem glow when mana is imbued into it. Ayaka tries to intervene and point out how wrong they are in treating the boy this way, but Vicious knocks her down with a punch to the stomach. On top of that, she orders everyone to look at the discarded hero and warns that this will be the fate of all who do not have the necessary capability to fulfill the objective, in other words, the losers. Fed up with the humiliation, Memori unleashes one of his powers, paralysis, but nothing happens to the goddess, who is immune to such weak abilities due to a dissipating bubble that constantly surrounds her body. This bubble provides absolute protection against status spells. Given this, the goddess takes the opportunity to further humiliate the boy, loudly declaring that Memori is a Class E loser. Just to test his above-average powers, Takudo casts a dragon explosion on the hall's wall, clearly showing the contrast between himself and the discarded hero who bows his head in the face of everything he is experiencing. Along with Takudo, all the students despise their classmate who was classified as the weakest, while Vicious asks for Memori's last words. Crying and speechless, the boy remembers when he was beaten by his father. On one of those days, his brother came to him and taught him that no matter how much we pretend to be harmless, that is never who we really are. In fact, this repressed way of being is the opposite of what we can express, and showing this personality trapped inside us is what will dictate our path. With this memory in mind, Memori tells the goddess to go to hell and warns her to prepare herself in case he returns alive. With that, he is teleported to the Ruin of Discard and tries to open his status, but it's not possible due to the obscured vision of the place. Remembering what Vicious said about his return, the boy imbues mana into the accessory to generate a glow that he uses like a flashlight. Looking around, Memori notices the dreadful cave he has been placed in, along with split skulls littering the ground. As if that wasn't enough, he is attacked by a huge monster lurking in the dark corners of that area, and his only option is to run for his life, aware that he could never face such a powerful being. While running, he feels the real fear of losing his life, so he dims the light from his bag and keeps fleeing as best he can while crying, neither happy nor sad, just scared. However, during his escape, Memori realizes that this feeling isn't really fear. Tripping over a stone along the way, he falls, and then gets up, reflecting that the feeling bothering him is frustration, the same frustration he felt before being thrown into this filthy place. Be that as it may, he knows it is his end. Without weapons, without status, without strong abilities, he cannot confront a creature of this size. Suffering from all the humiliation he endured before arriving there, Memori uses paralysis on the monster. Seeing that it worked, he runs again while recalling what the goddess said about his status ability only working on low-level monsters, and a minotaur doesn't seem like a weak creature. After putting some distance between himself and the enemy, he encounters another, a bizarre bird exuding pure and genuine hostility. Crying once more, Memori expresses his burning desire to stay alive, so he repeats the strategy that worked last time. Casting paralysis, he immobilizes the monster in front of him. Still terrified, he checks his status and notices that his mana is running out, so he will only be able to cast one poison. Doing so, he observes the ghastly bird bleeding from its eyes and every possible orifice. The minotaur, having freed itself from the paralysis status, returns to attack the boy, who without mana wonders if the cliché won't be someone saving him at the last moment. However, as he saw just a short time ago, none of those people seemed willing to help Tauka Memori, the discarded hero. Alone in this world, Memori feels the same hatred he had for his father, when in the middle of a beating he said he would kill that man. Back then he realized he wasn't the protagonist of anything, and no one would help him when he needed it. So it was kill or be killed with no escape. All he could do was use his mana outside of his status adjustments if it ran out. In desperation, Memori tried to paralyze the minotaur, but according to the system, it wasn't possible to apply the same ability to a target repeatedly. So the boy decided to use a sleep spell, putting the monster to sleep. Then he poisoned the target, imagining there were other limitations besides not being able to repeat the skill, plus his mana was almost gone. As if that weren't enough, a legion of fierce birds approached the discarded hero. With no other choice, he used his mana outside of status to paralyze each of the enemies, causing numbness in his body as his entire power reserve drained away. Behind the birds, minotaurs made room to attack the human, who continued his strategy of paralyzing the targets despite everything. His body gradually reached its limit, with his leg trembling and making it difficult to stand. As a last gasp, Memori stood with difficulty until the system announced he had leveled up, which completely regenerated his mana and increased his status adjustment. With this, he assumed that killing that bird was enough for him to evolve, and now that he could fight again, it was his chance to continue the strategy as best as he could. As he kept using paralysis, he saw the level of this ability increase to the point where it could hit multiple targets at once. Feeling more confident, he paralyzed all the enemies and reflected that the goddess might be the only one unaffected by this power, because so far he had managed to hold his own. However, he noticed there was a distance limit to inflict status conditions, seeing that distant enemies couldn't be reached. So he walked among the paralyzed and poisoned creatures one by one. At this point, he saw his opponents only as walking experience points. His power had developed to the point where he acted comfortably in the face of danger. His stats were multiplied due to his level, and the massive amount of mana he achieved gave the impression that it was possible to get out alive. As the poisoned monsters died, Tauka Memori leveled up, constantly reaching near level 400. With the ocean of mana flowing in his veins as he leveled up, the boy put the opponents to sleep with his sleep ability, reaching level 500 over time. At that moment, the monsters that had been attacking turned and fled. After getting rid of the threat, he walked through the ruin of discard in search of equipment that could be used. Nothing very useful was found among that pile of dead, but there was no time to lament. He needed to find food and water to survive. Amid the endless columns of that dark abyss, Memori begged for food from whoever might be there, even though no one was there to help him. He was so hungry that he began to see the minotaurs as oxen ready to have their meat consumed. Once the poison was gone, Memori tried to cut the animal's skin, but its carcass was extremely tough. Faced with this, he tore out the creature's eye and bit into it, but the acid inside made him spit it out. out. Lying among the monster corpses, he reflected that this place was entirely designed not to leave any survivors. Suddenly, he saw the purple part of the crystal in his bag getting bigger and its weight increased drastically. Memori opened the bag and found packaged meat with soda, then drank the liquid without questioning where it came from. Definitely, this was the best food he had ever eaten in his life. Not for the taste itself, but for the necessity. Memori didn't know exactly what those colors were in his bag, or if it would produce food again, but either way that unique item wasn't to be abandoned. As the days passed, the young man got used to the ruin of Discard, and the dozens of monsters lining the dungeon could be seen paralyzed and poisoned, falling one by one to the ground lifeless. Observing that domino-worthy scene, Memori lamented the terrifying acts he had been committing under those circumstances, as if his soul screamed for humanity amidst that hell. As his level increased, he cried and questioned why he was there. As a child, Memori asked similar questions. His father wasn't a minotaur, but was so grotesque in the eyes of the little boy that he seemed scarier than the fierce birds trying to kill him day after day in the ruin of Discard. Speaking of which, since that time he knew he had to kill his father unless he wanted to be killed himself. Until one day his uncles extended their hands to the little boy, giving him the warmth of a family. They taught Memori to be kind, to have empathy for others' pain, and this upbringing made the boy think he had learned to be like them. However, looking at the devastation around him, he felt nothing, not even while taking the lives he had taken. The lack of fear in killing made him fear himself, that there was nothing that could be done, not in the ruin of Discard. As his brother used to say, one must accept who they are. With this in mind, the exiled hero now walked as the new Toka Memori. As days passed, in the midst of his long journey, the young man found a cave environment with a unique atmosphere where a door had a talisman with a blue crystal. The color reminded him of mana, which made him imbue the stone with this type of energy and enter a room where a couple had died long ago, but with no signs of struggle, just accepting their death, holding hands. Memori paid his respects to the dead and opened a bag beside them, discovering a good amount of precious stones. Walking through that territory, Memori reached the 25th hall, which required an enormous amount of mana to open. Inside, another discarded hero had been reduced to bones by the time of decay, and a tear in the deceased's tunic made the boy imagine it was the fatal wound that led to his death. Among the deceased's belongings, a letter had the language of this world, but to Memori's surprise he could read it. According to the writings, this man was Anglin Bathard, known as the Great Sage. However, he was better known by his former nickname, the Dark Hero. At that moment, Memori remembered when the goddess said that Yasu Tomohiro had awakened a power equal to that of the Dark Hero, the most powerful of all. According to Anglin, he was forcibly sent to these ruins by the goddess Vicious because he was no longer needed. In this letter, Anglin asks the person who finds his body to take something he desperately brought there. In the sage's words, the demon army is wicked, but its wickedness is nothing compared to the goddess Vicious. Minoru doesn't know to what extent this is different from that entity, but the hatred he feels for her stirs a mixed feeling between the need for justice and revenge, like a clash of evil against evil. Among his belongings was the complete work of Forbidden Arts, where recipes for potions and magical tools illustrated the aged pages. Additionally, a scroll of forbidden magic was described with symbols that Memori could not decipher but might be useful at some point. Upon opening the book, Memori was met with the phrase, "Beware of the soul devourer, it was what killed everyone else." As he walked through those dark alleys, the young man honored the dead scattered on the ground, as if trying to stay sane, or perhaps even reclaim part of the humanity he thought he had destroyed. At the top of a staircase ahead, he found a door that required an object to open, and in the hope it would lead to the surface, the forgotten hero set out to find this item, whatever it might be. Thinking to himself, not even the Dark Hero, the most powerful being in this world, was able to face the soul devourer, but Memori believed he had evolved to the point of trying his luck. Speaking of which, the end of a corridor featured a macabre face carved into a wall, and on the forehead of this head an object that might be what he needed. Imagining it might be the soul devourer, Memori exposed himself with the intent of quickly invoking some ability, but was surprised by an absurd reaction power that injured his hand with a beam of energy. Apparently, this beam is activated when the target shows intent to attack. Moreover, that face was out of reach of his magic, so perhaps it was better to evolve more before confronting this thing. However, the structure detached from the wall and revealed itself to be a creature with a life of its own, which could mean the classic kill or be killed scenario for the discarded hero. Outside, a woman reached the ruin of discard and approached the entrance. Memori did not doubt that a being of this level was unaware of his presence there, so he needed to stay as alert as possible. Soon the Soul Devourer expelled a viscous substance that gave life to hideous monsters formed from that disgusting puddle. One day these monsters were the discarded humans in this ruin, and their faces were the same as they were when killed by the macabre entity, their last expression before death. Curious about the boy's reaction to this bizarre spectacle, the Soul Devourer opened a smile that emitted an indescribable sound, almost driving the human insane. Memori paralyzed the monsters in front of him and tried to poison them, but something prevented him from doing so. It was the feeling of empathy that still existed within him, because even though they were dead, the human faces in agony caused a sense of terror and hesitation. Once again, the boy shed tears of despair, and the Soul Devourer savored the realization of his intent. More and more monsters were expelled from that malevolent entity, making Memori beg for his life, unable to harm what he saw as people. In the demon's eyes, the expression of ecstasy spread across his entire face, widening his pupil to the peak of emotion. In light of this, Memori felt that the enemy had let his guard down, so he decided to paralyze the devourer who had made a fatal mistake that only the most powerful beings known could make so confident in their immortality. According to Memori, the certainty of victory gives rise to his worst enemy, overconfidence. After convincing the demon with his desperate performance, the boy couldn't have expected a better act. After all, it had been years and years of trying to be normal, pretending to be someone he really wasn't. Memori might have deluded himself and thought at some point that he was like the others, but that didn't change the fact that from the beginning everything he was practicing was a distasteful performance but necessary to live in society. Over the years he had forgotten who he really was, but the ruin of discard brought back the true Touka Memori. With that said, he poisoned the Soul Devourer, responding to blood with blood as it should be. After being thrown into this place for being weak, after being ridiculed, the boy found in hatred the strength necessary for his redemption. In the end, a boy discarded like trash was able to overthrow the lord of this hell. According to Memori, a pathetic end for the Soul Devourer. Meanwhile, the demon tried to struggle against the paralysis, but the resistance only caused additional damage, and the creature's bluish blood oozed from those twisted eyes. As the poison coursed through the demon's veins, the devourer was devoured until cracks could be seen in the heavy structure of his body. With that, the entity died, freeing the souls imprisoned in the abyss within. The spirits thanked the young man for what he had done, and among them was the couple Memori had found in one of the secret rooms. Lastly, Anglin Bathard, the great sage, personally asked Memori to destroy the goddess Vicious. After the brief encounter, Memori collected the devourer's eye and placed it in the door that led to the exterior of the ruin. Before leaving forever, he bid farewell to the place that had awakened his true self. Meanwhile, free from the start to hone their skills within the comfort of society, the other students who were sucked into this world hunt monsters and demons in the wilderness. Kirihara Takudo, with his well-known dragon burst, stands out among the group members, reaching level 18. Similarly, Yasu finds enjoyment in burning enemies and shows a personality that had always been trapped behind his timid and cowardly demeanor. However, it's clear that not everyone thrives in this chaotic world, and one of those struggling is Kobato. Cornered, the girl doesn't feel comfortable exploring the dangerous forest she's found herself in, even as Asagi keeps stoking the fire at every moment. Using her cunning words, Asagi points out that the class will probably split into two groups at some point because this place is full of egotistical and self-centered people. To make matters worse, each student received a ranking from E to S, which only fuels this feeling of exclusion. Incidentally, despite being ranked B, Asagi hopes Kobato will join her group when the split happens, because surely Kirihara won't invite a rank D to his team, and the Takao sisters are always a duo, plus Ayaka is bound to die anyway. Hearing that her friend is in danger, the innocent girl panics and falls for her colleagues' manipulations, keeping her close for less than honorable reasons. By claiming that Kobato's first choices aren't available, Asagi ensnares her further into her web. To officially introduce her to the group, Asagi makes Kobato kill a creature to pass the goddess's test. Otherwise, she'll meet the same fate as Memori. Filled with fear, the girl sets aside her innocence, closes her eyes, and kills the the creature. After the initiation rite, the group leader announces a new member has emerged. Kobato kneels and cries, thinking of her friend who was exiled to the wasteland of discard. Her memories of Memori are of a kind and empathetic boy, and imagining him dead, she blames herself for not doing anything. Similarly, waking up injured from the punch she received from vicious Ayaka, Sagu laments the fate of her friend. But unlike Kobato, she confronts the goddess to take some action. When confronted, the entity pretends to be sad and cries in front of the student, claiming she only followed Alien's law, but insists there's no time for tears, especially for Ayaka, because while she slept for the past few days, the rest of the students embarked on a test to see if they could kill a monster. In fact, many have already shown themselves incapable and were disqualified. Feigning tears, Vicious states that the rule demands the weak be eliminated. Outraged, Ayaka dares to challenge the goddess's methods, who this time drops her mask and laughs at the human's audacity. According to her, the world is indeed full of people with unfounded opinions, but that doesn't change the fact that the weak must be discarded. Since Vicious only tolerates rank students, Ayaka commits to fulfilling her duty to make up for those who couldn't pass the test, so the discards are stopped. With irony, Vicious responds that she expected nothing less from a rank S and extends her hand to seal the reconciliation. Finally, the entity states she has high expectations of the human, which she surely already knew, especially after the promise she just made. As the conversation ends, leaving Vicious's room, Ayaka still feels the coldness of her hands. Meanwhile, running through the forest around the wasteland of discard, a mysterious girl tries to escape her pursuers. Among them are Magat's Bladen, the Sword of God, Ashura, the Bizarre Demon, Jiobane Singai, the Super Pressure, and Zarash Finebard the Fang. Together, the four form the Sacred Watchers and are after the girl they call the Night Princess. Adjusting to the sunlight after so long, Minoru opens his status menu and notices his mana points are well above average, unlike the rest of his stats. But what he wanted to confirm is that he can paralyze at will, even just the head. Besides that, he sees he can also cancel poison or make it non-lethal. With this, he plans to experiment with the techniques on some monster along the way, but first he needs a sword and someone to act as a tank for him on the front line. While reflecting on this, Memori sees a group of slimes trying to subdue a much smaller one. The human thinks the small creature won't manage against the group, but to his surprise it does and drives the attackers away. At this moment, the boy intervenes, paralyzing and poisoning all of them. Having done that, he notes that from then on, he could alter the skill settings to choose to make the poison non-lethal, for example. After testing all the possibilities, he wanted Memori cancels the negative statuses and lets the slimes go, but keeps the small hero paralyzed. Then he approaches and apologizes for not arriving sooner to help, though it was good to see the small slime defending itself against a group of bigger aggressors. Saying this, Memori packs his things and wishes the mini slime good luck, but instead of leaving, the walking jelly follows the human. After a few steps, Memori notices the creature's presence but ignores it and continues on his way. Seeing this, the slime struggles to catch the boy's attention, who then realizes the slime won't leave his side, probably because it's like him, a being that doesn't fit anywhere. Back to the Night Princess, despite her fleeing, she still senses the presence of the Sacred Watchers. In her mind, the Watchers are waiting for her to exhaust herself, and this makes her think that's how heroic blood bearers hunt. Reading the complete works of forbidden arts, Memori discovers the slime can serve as a third eye at his rear, which can be very advantageous in moments like this. In the end, befriending this creature turned out to be the right decision. Turning his focus back to the reading, he reads the description of a forbidden art that teaches how to enhance slimes. Then he confesses to his new companion that he is on a quest for revenge, and if the monster wants to continue alongside the human, it must adapt to this. Therefore, if it doesn't agree, it needs to leave now. As the slime showed no objections, Memori names it Pigimaru and continues his journey. The princess feels her four pursuers closing in and realizes she won't be able to shake them off, so she resorts to a more drastic measure. After reciting the incantation and performing the correct gestures, she summons the spirit armor, which envelops her body. Once this technique is complete, the warrior stands still waiting for her enemies to arrive. A little further back, the guards confront Memori, scornfully insulting the boy. Jiobane orders him to leave anything valuable behind to be spared, but Magats is intent on testing the edge of his new sword on a human, leaving no one alive. alive. Whatever the man decides, Zarash urges him to hurry because the Night Princess must be losing all her stamina by now. Ashura mentions that dealing with men is quicker, prompting Jiobane to suggest they drag a pretty girl from the city instead. However, Ashura confesses he can no longer be satisfied after encountering the Night Princess, leading Zarash to cut off the chatter, reminding them they were paid to work. Magats attempts to test his sword on the boy, but Memori paralyzes the god sword. At that moment, Memori realizes his abilities work on humans too, possibly with the sole exception of that goddess. Breaking his act of a defenseless and desperate boy, Memori coldly states that these men before him are not as intimidating as the creatures he faced in the ruins of Discard, although their malice is far worse than that of the monsters. In other words, Memori calls the guards trash. In the boy's hood, Pigemaru agrees. Talking to his slime, the boy admits he would love to see these men die. After all, bloodlust should be met with bloodlust and hostility with hostility, just as it was with the Soul Devourer. Thinking of his classmates, Memori decides he won't mind killing humans along the way. He poisons the 4 members of the Sacred Watchers, steals some of their belongings, and senses another presence approaching. At this moment, the Night Princess stops sensing her pursuers and starts fearing they might be hiding. Listening more carefully, she detects someone's presence, and the feeling, though not as strong, is profoundly unsettling, so much so that even the spirits are terrified by it. Reactively, the woman swings her sword, nearly striking Pigemaru, while Memori seizes the opportunity to paralyze her from behind. Besides sensing the woman's hostility, the discarded hero felt something else that intrigued him. Thus, he wishes to talk a bit to clarify things, although he intends to keep the girl immobilized to avoid any risk. The princess asks what he wants, and he confesses that he is a lost foreigner in need of help with directions. She inquires about the 4 men in the forest, and Memori asks if they were her friends. Since the paralysis affected the girl's mouth, Memori disables it to allow a proper response. Before she says anything, he asks her to understand this level of distrust, as he had to go through a lot to get here. She then asks what he did to the 4 men, and when he reveals he killed them, she can hardly believe this boy single-handedly took down the Sacred Watchers, thus questioning if Memori had an ally. Memori admits to having an ally, but prefers not to reveal who it is at the moment. The princess senses no deceit in the boy's statements, so she commits to answering any questions as honestly as possible. Finding it strange that the woman claims to know if he's telling the truth, Memori comments that she doesn't seem like a bad person, but like her, he doesn't feel confident enough to reveal certain things about himself just yet. For this reason, he prefers that their conversation remains impersonal, avoiding dubious or revealing questions, and the paralyzed girl agrees. First of all, he tells her that they are not in Alien, but in a forest south of the kingdom of Ulza. He makes this remark because he assumed the ruins of Discard were in Alien. Besides this, he asks the woman if she knows anything about the text he presents to her, and she believes it derives from an ancient script she unfortunately can't read, but knows someone who can, a person known as the Witch of Taboos. This person possesses such extensive knowledge of what's forbidden in this world that she was considered dangerous. She lives in the land of the golden-eyed monsters, a hostile area in the center of this continent. With the great help the woman provided, Memori acknowledges her sense of honor, reminding him of his own aunt. Then he assures her that the paralysis will wear off in a few minutes and promises to pray for her safe journey. He departs with Pigemaru telling the slime he doesn't intend to kill without reason, but according to his own rules. Moreover, he counts on the slime to keep an eye on their rear in case the woman attacks once freed. Meanwhile, some monsters eye the hefty reward for the head of a Ni paladin defeated by Bakos, who is the princess of that ancient half-elf nation. Her name is Siraz Ashrain. One day later, at the gate of the provincial city of Mills, Tauka Memori appears hooded, trying to draw as little attention as possible. Seeing no weapon on the stranger, the guard asks if he is a mercenary responding to the call to conquer the ruins, and he confirms that he is. With this, the guard allows him passage because the Marquis wants as many mercenaries as possible at the ruins. Looking for a place to stay, he finds an inn and hears that a room costs 2,000 makas per night. Memori notices the attendant isn't looking at him kindly, so he justifies his dirty clothes by saying the journey was long and tiring. Not only that, he pulls out a coin with the amount the man wanted to see, and this indeed indeed changes the innkeeper's mood. Beaming with joy, he asks the visitor's name, and Mimori introduces himself as Hattie Skull. At night, he walks the streets and notices no one suspicious of the strangers, and the city exudes a sense of security that the exiled hero hasn't felt in a long time. Around him, the corners are occupied by typical shops of a medieval fantasy city in the west, as well as an adventurer's guild. The visitor goes in search of magical items to buy, but not before eating after a long and exhausting journey. Enjoying a decent meal after the scarcity suffered in the ruin of Discard, Mimori relishes the rustic flavor of the food, which, although seemingly hastily made, is the best he has had in a long time. At the neighboring table, men drink and laugh, and these heightened spirits make it easier for the stranger to eavesdrop on the region's rumors. Before long, the drunken men begin to argue among themselves about the most powerful army on the continent amid the knights and monsters that roam the region. Among many alternatives, they consider the brigade led by the handsome, mad Emperor Falkendotsine, famous for being invincible. Aside from them, the Kingdom of Magmar to the north is home to the Order of the White Wolf. There's also the Sacred Order of Purging from Yamato to the west, and the Kingdom of Ulza itself where they are, which has the Order of Monster Hunters. However, among all mentioned, they recognize that the greatest force on the continent is the Black Dragon Knights of the Bakos Empire, who exterminated the Holy Empire of Ni. They heard that their 5 dragons alone faced an entire army. Among their members, they have the strongest of humanity and the hero hunter. Having mentally noted everything, Mimori returns to his room and gives some food to Pigamaru. Soon he focuses on defining future plans, considering that the priority is to find someone who can read the scroll of forbidden magic. The woman in the forest indicated the Witch of Taboos, who resides in the land of the golden-eyed monsters. Additionally, he needs to find a way to enhance Pigamaru, as he read in one of the spells from the Book of Forbidden Arts. Turning his eyes to the book, he reads that he needs to create an enhancement using powdered bone from a skeleton king, and that this monster lives precisely in the ruin of Mills. The next day, Cred Harley welcomes the mercenaries who have volunteered to conquer this dungeon. Nicknamed the Knower by the inhabitants, the Marquis of the province announces that a new floor has been discovered in the ruin of Mills, and that their mission is to explore this floor in search of the Dragon Eye Chalice. The person who brings this relic will be rewarded with 300 gold coins. Additionally, anyone who brings any treasure from that place, as long as they do not want to keep the item for themselves, will also be paid. Hearing this, Mimori realizes that he will be able to get the bone powder he needs. With that said, the registration process begins, and 2 lines form to register the mercenaries for the mission. In the line next to him, Mimori notices a man named Monk Drogetti harassing a girl, flirting with her in an extremely intrusive manner. Keeping her cool, the woman asks what the guy wants, and he jokes that she has the same attitude as that paladin Sarah's Ashrain, and everyone around tenses up at the mention of the princess of the Ni Empire, because she is a public figure surrounded by myths, as well as having a bounty on her head. Boasting the medieval Shaggy claims to have seen the Night Princess before, and that she was extremely beautiful. Despite inviting the maiden to dinner, the knight was treated with great disdain by the noble, and now we can imagine why. Not wanting to let this episode go, he is determined to expose the princess. In his mind, the person in front of him is none other than Sarah's Ashrain, because he could never forget the unmistakable volume of her pair of melons. She denies being who the man claims, so he pulls her hood to reveal her elf ears, which would prove she is the princess, but is startled to see they are perfectly human ears. Faced with this, the woman introduces herself as Mist Balukas, leaving the man embarrassed in front of everyone because of the show he put on for nothing. After registering, Mimori looks for a shop to buy supplies needed for the expedition. Suddenly walking beside him is the woman who calls herself Mist, with an unwavering desire to flaunt her cleavage, even though she is wearing a cloak to hide her identity. Mist strikes up a conversation with the stranger, and he advises her to be careful because there will always be foolish bullies like that Monk Drogetti. Additionally, he intends to pay the woman to show him items that are truly valuable because he is afraid of being deceived by merchants since he is an outsider. Needing funds for a trip, the woman does not refuse the money. With the agreement made, the two shake hands and repeat their false names, which Hattie Skull insists are not real, but no one there needs to get into those details. Soon the two roam the city in search of the items the man needs, and at the end of the assistance he makes a generous payment to the companion because according to him her help saved him 3 silver coins. It is much more than Mist expected, inflicted, but necessity makes her gladly accept her reward. After that, she prepares to go on her way, but nearly collapses from not having slept for several days. Embarrassed, she says goodbye to the boy and hurriedly leaves. Piggymaru shows up to ask what's next even without saying a word, and Memori announces it's time to head to Mill's ruin. Hours later, already in the middle of the expedition, he hears the shouts of mercenaries who have encountered a small demon bull, a smaller version of the Minotaur from the Discard ruin. As the beast climbs the stairs, Memori paralyzes and poisons it, then quickly plunges his dagger into the animal's skin, discovering it isn't as tough as the creatures he faced in the Discard ruin. Hearing footsteps, Memori hides behind a wall, and the mercenaries who fled have called a stronger one to deal with the demon bull. However, the man sees that the monster is already dead, and the single knife wound makes the three of them believe it was the cause of death. As he continued his path, Memori didn't feel threatened by any monsters, and they didn't give much experience either because they were too weak for him, so he decides to quicken his pace and reach the more difficult levels. A little further ahead, Monk Drughedi was paying 2 mercenaries to make the woman who scorned him regret being born. Driven by hatred, the mere knowledge that that woman exists makes Drughedi want to tear out his own teeth, and he won't sleep peacefully until he sees that arrogant face twisted in despair. After ending her life, he plans to turn her remains into feed. The description was so literal, it scared the executors themselves, who don't care what happens to her as long as they can have some fun first. At that moment, Memori appears and states that the 3 of them are beyond salvation. Obviously, the group is enraged, and everyone draws their weapons, so the discarded hero paralyzes the 3 of them and questions if they intended to kill someone with those tools. This sadistic side of him makes the boy want to vomit, probably because it reminds him of his parents. With this memory in mind, his blood boils a little more, and he poisons the mercenaries. Having done that, he confesses that exterminating parasites like them is better than finding money on the ground. Choking on the poison, Drughedi vows he won't forget this, so Memori laughs because memory is something these 3 won't have soon. Speaking of which, with the approach of monsters in that corner, the supposed hero leaves the mercenaries and shows who really becomes monster feed in the end. Some time later, Memori imagines he is near the new floor, so he decides to take a break before descending. After sleeping for 3 hours, he thanks Piggymaru for keeping watch and resumes the journey. Upon opening one of the ruined doors, he encounters the Saber Tigers, a group that warns of something strange happening in this ruin. Foss, the team's vice captain, highlights that monsters have been appearing dead in a peculiar way, and no one can tell the cause of their death. It's only visible that their skin turns deadly pale. The captain of the Saber Tigers, Lily Adamantine, adds that even the strong monsters are going through this, and because she values her group members, the leader decided to abandon the expedition to avoid putting anyone at risk, and she wants to know if the boy would like to leave with the others. Pretending it doesn't concern him, Memori decides to stay there and imagines that if this news spreads, it will be great for him, as it will mean less competition for what he came to seek. Speaking of which, the next door didn't hold exactly what he wanted, but the Dragon Eye Chalice before him is a great find. However, Memori is a fan of Japanese fiction and knows well that the gargoyle behind him will come to life as soon as he touches the relic, so he paralyzes and poisons the monster before it can manifest. Having done this, he collects the artifact and sees the beast's neck collapse from the rest of its body. Soon after, Mist Baluka appears in the room, imagining she would be the first to arrive there, and the man offers her the chalice since he didn't come for it. Incredulous, Mist asks what the guy wants in return, and he sarcastically replies that Hattie Skull works just to see the smile on the beauty's faces of Mills. The girl doesn't believe him, of course, so he stops joking and reveals that he came for a monster on the deepest floor yet discovered in this ruin. Not wanting to take the chalice for free, Mist offers her help, and seeing that she won't back down, Memori accepts, but under the condition that neither of them ask personal questions. Down below, Mist proves with her sword that she won't be a burden to the exiled hero. Moreover, when Memori asks about the topic, she reveals that monsters with golden eyes give an obscene amount of XP and are the main channel for heroes to level up, because killing other people doesn't grant them experience points. With that said, Memori understands why he came up empty-handed when he took out the Sacred Watchers. According to Mist, some golden-eyed monsters are even capable of having good relationships with humans. According to legend, the Demon King radiates an energy known as the Demon King's essence, and the monsters influenced by this energy have golden eyes. Thinking about this, Memori remembers the the golden aura around Kirihara Takuto. As soon as they open the next door, Pigemaru indicates that he wants to meet the maiden, so the boy formally introduces the two. The group decides to take a break to rest, and as soon as Mist lies down, Memori uses his spell to put her to sleep and recover a bit. With her body at rest, the woman reveals her elf ear, showing that she is indeed Sira's Ashrain. Meanwhile, the Black Dragon Knights find the Sacred Watchers dead without any signs of aggression, and Sivit Gartland, the strongest of humanity, assumes it was the Night Princess with her spirit armor. Speaking of her, the paladin wakes up without knowing how she fell asleep in the first place. Pigemaru seems to want to alert her to something waking his master with the noise. They continue their journey until they find a room where Memori believes her boss is absent. However, upon hearing a collapsing noise, the duo runs away from the sound. Then a Skeleton King is revealed, having dug its way to the surface. The two know this is a formidable enemy, so they double their attention. Sirez knows the monster and is aware that the silver part under its chin needs to be broken. Nonetheless, the princess points out that not even the saber tigers could deal with this opponent, so caution is necessary. Analyzing the creature, Memori believes it sees Sirez as the real threat here. In her first move, the princess announces she intends to use magic to enhance her physical abilities and create exclusive armaments, but since this is a technique she wants to keep secret, she asks Memori to keep it just between them. Additionally, she apologizes in advance if she cannot protect Memori from this enemy, as she doesn't know its true strength. Thus, she wants the boy to flee if necessary. With that said, the guy paralyzes and poisons the Skeleton King with ease, leaving Sirez stunned. After defeating the monster, Memori is thrilled to find what he came for: the bone powder from this monster that allows for the physical enhancement of Pigemaru. Sirez asks if this was the target the boy was looking for, but Memori keeps it secret and claims he will answer all questions he can on the surface. Then Pigemaru points in a direction, so Memori goes there and finds a strange object shining intensely like a magical fabric or something. Inside the cloth, there was an egg that the slime wanted to take home, so the human helps Pigemaru, even without knowing what it is. Elsewhere in the dungeon, mercenaries were being chased by skeleton knights running for their lives. One of the fighters tries to defeat the monsters, but is repelled without difficulty. Sakura was crying because she lost her hand in battle, while a friend rescued her in hopes that the goddess would heal the severe wound. Taking the front line, Ayaka doesn't feel confident enough to advance against the enemies, so Omiyata Shogo takes the vanguard and delivers the Scarlet Punch shot, shattering the first skeleton. Right behind, Kirihara Takuto uses his famous dragon explosion to eliminate the problem once and for all. Having done that, the boy even admits he faced formidable opponents, but that he is simply stronger and prevailed. With that, he reaches level 24. Outside the dungeon, Sirez Ashrain displays the Dragon Eye Chalice, leaving everyone around her in awe. Isolated from the crowd, Memori concludes his business in the ruins of Mills. Sirez comes running towards him and states that there will be a reception tomorrow where she will receive her reward, so she will spend the night in town. Since the princess is free, Memori asks her for a private conversation in his room at 8 p.m. Surprised by the boy's straightforwardness in scheduling the meeting, she accepts the terms, but before Memori leaves, she thanks him for his help in retrieving the chalice. Later, before the princess arrives, the boy produces the long-awaited monster enhancement solution. Soon, Sirez knocks on the door at the exact appointed time. Getting straight to the point, Memori reveals he would like to hire the paladin as a bodyguard, though he understands if she prefers to use the chalice money to travel or do other things. Mentioning the Dragon Eye Chalice, Memori wishes to remind the girl that he helped throughout the process, as a way to make her feel coerced into accepting what he wants in some way. Memori knows this is playing dirty, but honestly he doesn't care. His goal is to find the taboo witch in the land of the golden-eyed monsters, so he would feel safer having a talented swordswoman by his side on this mission. Anyway, Sirez reveals that it would be convenient for her to travel this path, considering she needs to reach the Duchy of Yamato. But as the woman still shows indecision, Memori asks her to take some time to think about the proposal without rushing things. He then reveals he knows that Mist Baluka's real name is actually Sirez Ashrain, taking the opportunity to tell her he made her fall asleep in the ruins of Mills through a spell, and did so because surely the elf wouldn't sleep if she were worried about hiding her true identity. Since she hadn't slept for a long time, the human thought it best to give her this rest, even without her consent. Regarding this, Sirez reveals she uses the power of spirits to conceal her identity. identity. In exchange, this requires her to forego her desire to sleep. In other words, she needs to stay awake for the effect to remain. Moreover, the Sacred Watchers were pursuing Siraz because they caught her off guard and discovered she was the paladin of Ni. Now that all of them are dead, she thanks the human once more, revealing her pointed elf ears. Seeing the woman give up hiding who she is, Momori assumes she trusts him, and she confirms it's true. Thus, the man returns the favor by revealing his true name, but asks the elf not to share this information with anyone. In return, he will not tell anyone that Mist is actually the Night Princess. With that decided, the two shake hands and seal the deal to embark on this journey together. Then Momori gives her a bluish magic stone as payment for the new bodyguard. She is left speechless because it is certainly a blue dragon gem. Indeed, Momori didn't know this, so he asks if it's a valuable item. Siraz explains that these stones are born inside legendary blue-eyed dragons and are extremely rare pieces. Their value is so great that it surpasses even that of the Dragon Eye Chalice. Because of this, she doesn't understand how Momori can simply give her something so valuable. Thinking about the princess's reaction, the man believes she is too good for her own good. Nonetheless, he reaffirms that the gem belongs to Siraz, and if she doesn't want it, she can just throw it away. Thus, the princess gives up arguing and decides to keep her payment. Momori requests to continue being called Hattie Skull, and he proceeds to call her Mist. Since the subject was brought up, Siraz notes that her travel companion still knows very little about her, so she plans to share more about herself. However, Momori doesn't wish to investigate the princess's past. He only cares about having a valuable bodyguard by his side on this journey. Siraz comments on the kindness of her employer, allowing her to maintain her discretion, and he responds that he is indeed a cool guy. After the meeting, while taking a bath, the Night Princess reflects that she should have purified herself before meeting with Lord Tauka Momori. When he said he didn't want to know about her past, Siraz believed him just as she believed in the princess. At dawn, they meet at a tavern for breakfast, and two men at another table offend the woman by saying that a mercenary has already ensnared her. One of them comments that she was seen leaving the room of the guy sitting next to her. Even though he is involved in the conversation, Momori asks the paladin not to mind those guys' talk, so she responds that Lord Hattie Skull is quite mature about it. To distract her, he asks if Siraz has ever heard of forbidden magic, and as soon as she confirms, Momori notices that she always has the habit of touching her chest while talking. Siraz explains that these magics are ancient spells prohibited by the goddess via decree. Hearing this, the boy imagines that Vicious forbids these spells precisely because they are dangerous to her. After breakfast, the elf informs him that the reception is scheduled for now, so she leaves to receive her reward and says she should return by early afternoon. Under the pseudonym of Hattie Skull, the hero abandoned by the goddess of this world follows his path alone until Siraz returns. After these days in the princess's presence, the man finally has time to focus on his work, such as improving Piggymaru. At the reception, Ashrain listens to Cred Hercley, Marquis of Mills, thanking all the guests for their presence and announcing that he has brought a wizard specializing in breaking illusions to prove the authenticity of the Dragon Eye Chalice. Upon entering the hall, the sorcerer had a frightening appearance, and Siraz swallows hard when faced with that cold and eccentric expression. Meanwhile, Momori keeps an eye on the time as he waits for his bodyguard's return. Back at Alien Castle, the headquarters of the heroes of this world, Ayaka asks if Sakura is okay, and the goddess Vicious assures her that she will reattach her hand through healing, but reminds her that she can't do this for just anyone. Sakura belongs to rank B, and that's the only reason she will have this privilege. Then Vicious asks if Ayaka will join Kirihara's group, and the girl doesn't think she would get along with that guy. But that's precisely why the entity brought it up. According to her, Ayaka is disturbing the harmony of Class 2C with her selfishness. Ayaka desperately tries to defend herself from this accusation, so Vicious asks the human to calm down, claiming that it might have just been an unfounded rumor by some classmates. With that said, the goddess starts crying and blaming herself. Ayaka insists on asking for forgiveness, but reiterates that it's not a good idea to make her join Kirihara. Vicious implies that this decision is the same as turning her back on someone who needs saving, so the human argues that she is fulfilling her duty as a class's heroine in her own way. Thus, Vicious hands over all the students who didn't pass the test to the girl, meaning she will be responsible for training them all. If Ayaka refuses, the entity claims she will have no alternative but to eliminate everyone, as she received a royal decree to strictly follow Alien's rules. rules. With no way out, the heroine accepts the proposal, and as soon as she leaves, Vicious finally expresses all her hatred for the brat. Keeping an eye on the clock, Memori starts to think something might have happened to Ceres, so he asks Piggymaru's opinion. If the slime screams twice, he thinks the elf abandoned them. If it screams only once, he thinks otherwise. When Piggymaru gives just the first scream, Memori agrees that they are on the same page and that all that's left is to trust that Ceres didn't leave, since she has no reason to do so as far as they know. Amidst this, Memori hears people saying on the street that the woman who found the chalice is the fugitive princess and that she escaped to the dark forest while being pursued by the Black Dragon Knights. The man's words prove true as Ashrain rushes into the forest while the mounted men on winged beasts attack. After enchanting her sword, she takes down the first opponent. After that, the second falls before the elf's blade. Even with her illusion broken, which significantly affects her spiritual energy, Ashrain kills the third opponent. Then Ceres confronts Gizun, vice captain of the squad led by Sir Orban of the Five Dragons. Unable to use her spirit garment, the elf will have to manage with the available spirits. Since he's going to kill the princess, the boastful officer reveals that Orban's team is under secret orders and wants Ashrain dead. However, before doing so, he intends to show the elf what it's like to be with a man before sending her to the afterlife. At that moment, arriving just in time, Memori paralyzes and poisons Gizun. Then he puts the enemy to sleep, fearing he might overhear something he shouldn't. This way, he discovers that he will also be pursued if he continues to be with Ceres, so the elf wishes to break the agreement they made. However, instead of fleeing, Memori gives all his blue dragon gems to the princess so she won't be without resources. Lastly, he asks Ceres to take off her clothes right there, leaving the girl speechless.